Hey everyone, I wanted to jump on today and give you guys a walkthrough of this guide I created called Think Like an Entrepreneur. So the reason I created this guide is that if you look at our society, the vast majority of our society operates by the same general patterns of thinking, right? Authority, fear and guilt and shame, black and white thinking. This is the dominant baseline for how most people interact. And that kind of thinking is just absolute poison if you're going out to earn your own independent income. You've probably noticed that people who have run their own businesses, they conduct themselves and they think differently than other people you've met. Now, there's a reason for that, and part of that is that in order to be successful on your own, you have to kind of pass through this gauntlet of evolution, of complexity of thinking. And the type of evolution that has to occur here is something that honestly doesn't occur in most people's adult lives. It's on the scale of like if you have somebody who is, potentially even a criminal, and they go and they join the military and they get rebuilt from the ground up, similar kind of scale, or somebody who is an alcoholic who goes to AA and then like gets their life together and gets organized. That kind of transition is the same scale of evolution of complexity that has to happen to go from being an employee to entrepreneur, to earning your own independent income. That's how big it is. So, because of the fact that our society doesn't really facilitate this, like there are structures to help people make those other changes to go from uh, not having one's life together to having some basis of having one's life together. There aren't a lot of opportunities for people to do the same going from employee to entrepreneur. I mean, many people hire business coaches. Most business coaches don't actually understand all of this, and so they don't do a great job. And overall, it's not something that's really societally available. So I wanted to make sure that it's available to you all. Um, and I've seen some people who, they want to leave, they want to go start their own company, but they're still stuck in these old ways of thinking. And so deep down they know they're not ready, and they're right because they haven't done the underground work in their mind to prepare themselves for entrepreneurship. I've also seen people who make the jump because they just really feel that need, that urgency. They just got to get out of whatever, business, whatever job they're in, and they want to go start their own business, but they haven't made this shift in complexity of thinking. And then that business fails and they have to go back to work. And I want to help you, whether you're in either one of those cases, right? I want to make sure that you have the ability to make the jump, that you're ready, and that you actually succeed and prosper. So this guide's going to be broken into two sections. One's going to be on general perspective shifts, and then the next one is going to be specific to one's relationship with money. So we'll start off with the general perspective shifts. And just, in both of these, we're going to start from the most basic and then we're going to go to the most advanced. And as we start at the most basic, some of them are going to be stuff that actually you will learn as a, high performing employee. It may not be as important as it is in entrepreneurship, but it is stuff you'll pick up. And as we get to the more advanced stuff, you're going to be getting into stuff that's less likely to really be available for learning as an employee. So first general perspective shift here is initiative versus procrastination. So when you are responsible for your own income, there is no boss to make sure that you get things done. There's no deadlines. There's no work assigned to you. You are in charge of managing yourself. Um, this is why it's, honestly, if you have the chance to be a manager as an employee before you go be an entrepreneur, that's a good thing because managing other people at least gives you a chance to, develop the ability of management because now you're going to have to manage yourself. And so if you don't take responsibility for stuff when you're on your own, it just doesn't get done. So people who rely on external motivation have no chance of success generating an independent income. You have to have that intrinsic drive, right? One of the benefits of being on your own is that you have the freedom to set your schedule however you want. But the drawback of that is that if you don't set your schedule in such a way that it's productive, then you're not gonna have income, just full stop. One other thing it's important to note as far as entrepreneurship is that there are going to be times when there are emergency situations that require your immediate attention. So if you set deadlines for yourself that are last minute, if you procrastinate and you've got a bunch of stuff on your plate, you're like, oh, well, I'll figure it out. I'll pull it out in the last minute. And then you wind up in a situation where there's an emergency, you're just not going to be able to get everything done. It'll just be too much. It just won't be possible. That is why it's always better to be ahead of the curve. It's always better to get things done early. So I always recommend you ask yourself the question, when does this have to get or sorry, I recommend you ask the question, how soon can I get this done by? Instead of the one that most people ask, which is, when does this have to get done by? When does this have to get done by is a recipe for procrastination. How soon can I get this done by is a recipe for initiative. Next is prioritization. So when you're working as an employee, you get whatever tasks are handed to you, and the priority is set by your boss and by the company you're working for. Maybe if the workload isn't viable, you can push back, which may or may not have repercussions. But when you're a business owner, when you're doing your own thing, there is an infinite amount of work. Or if not infinite, there is far more work than you are capable of doing. There's always some opportunity that may at some point create some future revenue and some networking thing and the this and the that and other stuff. If you try to do everything, you're toast. You just don't have the bandwidth or the capacity. So it's necessary to prioritize what's essential and what isn't. Um, every business is going to have a time when there's some essential things that require tremendous effort, right? And this, this is what they call the hustle, right? There's a time when you're going to have to hustle. The key is you need to make sure that you have capacity so that when the hustle time comes, that you can manage it. Because if you run yourself ragged before the hustle time comes, then when the hustle time comes, you melt down and now you're screwed. Um, so, you don't want to be going to every networking event under the sun that's not producing revenue, and you're just talking with other entrepreneurs rather than actually talking with clients or whatever it is. And I saw someone the other day, he had a great thing. He said, they're either going to be purchasers, they're going to be partners, or they're going to be promoters. And if they're not one of those three, then don't go spend time on it. Purchaser being somebody who buys from you. Partner is somebody who you have some kind of business partnership with. And then a promoter is someone who's out there, promoting you to other people and selling for you because they just think they're super fan and they think you're amazing. So if they're not one of those three, don't bother with it. Also, there's some things that as an entrepreneur that are just really low value tasks. And especially early on, people are trying to conserve money and we'll talk about that mindset later. And so they will hesitate to outsource stuff. But if you're doing a minimum wage task instead of $100 an hour task, or even more, as an entrepreneur, then you're screwing yourself over, right? You have to be aware of the real value of your time. And trying to save nickels while depleting your bandwidth is not a good strategy, right? So be willing to outsource stuff to contractors or to employees. Don't spend your time doing minimum wage tasks if there's any way you can avoid it. Okay, next perspective shift is opportunity versus necessity. So most people instinctively, when they hear a new idea, think of why it won't work. And there's always a reason why it's always possible to find any reason why anything won't work. That's why most people only do things when they feel that they have to. And that is a reactive approach. And when you're waiting, when you're generating your own income, reactive approach rather than a proactive approach is a recipe for, at best, just scraping by, and at worst, getting yourself in a really, really, really tight situation. So you want to be out there looking for opportunity, not hoping that opportunity comes and knocks on your door, because that's it can happen. But if that's what you're expecting, then you're probably going to be disappointed. And many people, because they're not looking for opportunity, they walk right past stuff, right? There are things that they don't see, there are opportunities that they just completely miss because they're in their head, they're only reactive, they're not searching for things. We'll talk more about this one later also when we come to specifically generating wealth. Okay, next shift, and this is a big one. This is a big one, is releasing self-judgment. So most people go through life and they're not consciously aware of this, but like their primary focus is on not making a mistake. The fear of making a mistake shapes so many decisions and drives so much stress. It's unreal. Here's the thing though. The most effective way to avoid making mistakes is simply to not make decisions that could be wrong, right? So that's why people avoid making decisions. It's why they try to offload responsibility for decisions on other people. And if that's your approach, then your business just isn't going to move forward, right? Decisions are constant in entrepreneurship, from who you're going to target with your marketing to what software you're going to use, making decisions every damn day. You can't avoid that. And very often you'll see newbie entrepreneurs struggling to make these kinds of decisions. because they want to keep their options open or they want to avoid leaving money on the table. This is all just fear of being wrong by a different name. And they'll go into analysis paralysis and they'll like, oh man, well, I've got to do all this and the pros and cons list and this and the, that and everything. And then they avoid actually making the decision. And that's kiss of death, right? I can honestly say I've never seen a successful entrepreneur stagnate and avoid a decision based on, not wanting to make a mistake or keeping their options open or whatever. They may preserve some optionality if there's a way to do that, but they'll take some kind of forward action. They'll take the forward action and keep what optionality they can. They won't avoid the action and avoid the decision in order to keep the optionality. Because momentum is more important than optionality in almost every case. And not only do you have to be making decisions, you have to make them quickly. It's not because every decision is urgent. There are some that are, but they're few and far between. The big thing is that there's just so many decisions that if you get bogged down in the decision-making process and you make it hard to make a decision, it's not going to leave you time to actually go do things. You're just not going to be able to keep up. And that's why you can't let yourself get caught in analysis paralysis when you're earning independent income. It's just a recipe for time wasting. And remember, time is money, right? And the cost of the time that you're spending on stuff can often be greater than the cost of making a different choice, right? Unless the decision's a really, 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 really big one that could have a really big variance in outcomes for you, then don't spend more time on the decision than the variance is worth. Okay. Next, vision, right? So the whole nature of entrepreneurship, the whole nature of creating wealth requires vision. You have to see past what the world is at present to see what the world could be. And that means that you have to give yourself the ability to dream without interference. So, and this is related to the whole self-judgment thing, right? So people will dream and they'll be like, oh no, I couldn't do that. Oh no, I'm not worthy of that. Oh no, there's something wrong with that. And it gets back to this kind of, that kind of constrictive, boxed in energy of thinking. And you've got to be able to turn that off. Right. So you want to start by giving yourself free range to brainstorm and to dream. And then from there, you can plan out possible ways to get there. And in the course of that planning, it may emerge that some visions aren't practical, and that's fine. But the goal is that you're trying to find a way forward. You're not trying to find obstacles. That's the difference there. And then finally, you want to go back and you want to see, okay, well, let's see, how could this go wrong? There is a time to, apply that caution. But again, the purpose here is not to find what's wrong so you can throw out the plan. It's to find the risks so that you can mitigate those risks and improve the plan. A lot of this comes down to, when you're visioning, just not just taking something off the table because, well, there might be something wrong with it and just knock it off the table. You want to get creative and find a way around those obstacles and find a path towards that goal. Okay, next shift is optimism. So one of the things about entrepreneurship is that it involves a lot of work and it involves a lot of uncertainty. That's just the reality. And so if you don't develop a healthy sense of optimism, you're just not going to have the fuel to make it. Now, I'm not saying you should be delusionally optimistic. There's some people who are delusionally optimistic, and that only leads to worse outcomes because then, you're not planning based on reality and people don't take you seriously and all kinds of other stuff, right? Stay grounded in truth. That said, when there are many different paths in front of you, most people's tendency is to focus on the negative, focus on the risk, and magnify that and put a whole lot of weight on that and not put a lot of weight on the possibility of if things go right. And this is a very instinctive thing for humanity. And historically, it makes sense, right? When we were evolving on the plains of Africa, if you messed up and you somehow got separated from your tribe, curtains. If you messed up and you don't see the lion in the grass, curtains. It's over. If you messed up and you got injured and that thing got infected, no antibiotics, curtains, could be over, right? There's so many ways that you could just die. In today's society, at least in civilized world, that's no longer a thing, right? There's no, you don't have the risk of random death every time you walk down the street. If you make a mistake and spend some extra money on something that maybe it wasn't the best software choice, and you have to switch software and do a little bit of extra work later, that's not going to kill you, right? But our instincts are still wired based on magnifying this risk of death. And so we've got to be more, we've got to reshape our worldview to account for the differences in abundance and life-threatening risks that exist today compared to when we evolved. Okay, now we get to another big one, and this one is very much on the same scale as releasing self-judgment. Huge, 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 huge pillar, and that is consulting authority versus rationalistic thinking. So for the vast majority of people, if they don't have the answer to something, then they tend to seek the answer by trying to look it up or consult somebody else. So there's some authority outside of them that they go to get the answer. Unfortunately, that can work in some cases. There's some times when I actually think it's ill-advised because I think, there are many authorities who don't have your best interest at heart or who themselves are ignorant for some reasons. There's a lot of bad information out there for sure. And a lot of people who propounding that bad information as if it's good information and have some degree of stamp of authority. So, I would always say just be cautious. Just always think for yourself, even though most people don't. Um, but there are also many questions where the answer just isn't known, right? And so that's going to require original thinking to solve the problem. And that is something that many people are not used to. And I'm not trying to be offensive when I say that, there's a decent chance that you don't think for yourself a lot. I know that sounds offensive. I'm not trying to be offensive, but it is a critical thing to understand. And it's something that we can easily test, right? I don't want you to take my word for anything either. Go experiment, go test it out. So pay attention to how you react when you don't know the answer to something. Is your instinct to go find the answer somewhere outside of you? And let's say you can't find the answer, what happens then? For many people, if they can't find the answer, then they'll just kind of blank and be like, I don't know what to do. Or they'll deflect and they'll go do something else. This is why you'll very often you'll get entrepreneurs who they're super busy. They're spending a lot of time being busy doing all this stuff that's not really going to make a difference for the business. Oh, I've got to make sure the website's perfect, and I've got to do my business cards, even though no one's been using business cards for the past 10 years. And I need to make sure that my logo is perfect, and I need to organize the files on my computer. And oh man, I need to clean the house so that my environment is, which by the way, that is not a horrible thing for one specific type of person, one specific situation, but that's a different story. For most people, it's deflection. Um, and the reason they're deflecting is because there's something hard that they don't know the answer, that they don't want to sit down and think through. And as soon as they hit that challenge, they're like, whoa, whoa, and their mind starts to go off on the thing. And so if that's the case, that's what I'm talking about here. Right. And if that's you and you see that, then you massive up level right there because now right? So as I said, I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm trying to show you the way. Um, because what an entrepreneur will do is they'll sit and they'll apply logic and they'll reason forward from their premises and they'll try to get not to the correct answer because you can't be sure about the correct answer, but to the most probable answer. And that's one reason why people don't like to do this process is because they want to get to the correct answer and there isn't a known correct answer. There's only the most probable answer. And you got to be okay with that. And so if most people are being honest with themselves, that whole logical deduction process is somewhere between non-existent and a lot of effort. Now, related to that is there's an inverse of this that also happens, which is that for most people, if an authority tells you A, B, and C, then if you logic forward to something different, then that's not okay. Like there are certain things that are unthinkable because they contradict the correct answer from somebody else. So even people who get into this practice of logical deduction, there's this tendency to invalidate certain conclusions if it's what's not expected. This is honestly why you get a lot of science that is bogus or that has to be retracted. So like, oh no, that can't be the answer. But facts are facts, evidence is evidence. And in entrepreneurship, the market is an ambassador of reality, and reality doesn't care what the authorities have to say. So if you want to succeed, you've got to allow the evidence to rule the day. And if it challenges prevailing narratives, great, because that means that you found an area of competitive advantage because everybody else hasn't figured it out yet. And that's important. So in the same vein, right, if you're trying to deduce things, there will come times when you just don't have enough information to come to a conclusion. And at that time, that's when you want to experiment. You can't just give up. You can't just go act randomly when there's no clear answer. You got to figure it out. And that means spending time and money in order to get data to improve future decisions. This is why it's important to have lots of sales conversations with prospects. A lot of people who are early on in entrepreneurship, they want to avoid sales conversations, but you are depriving yourself of the data that you need. Every sales conversation is an experiment, and every one of them can teach you something. That's why good business owners, they use surveys, they use split testing, they have market research. Every sales conversation is a form of market research. Sometimes you don't even know what you don't know. So go and get the information. Do not attempt to impose your opinion on the market. Listen to the market. Don't try to tell the market how it needs to be because it does not care, right? Listen to the signals, learn to surf the wave. Okay, last general perspective shift before we dive into money. Binary thinking versus gradients. So most people have this tendency to categorize things as good and bad or right and wrong, and that fails to capture the nuance of the real world. And when you're responsible for your own income, you can't afford to lose that nuance. So, for example, some people um, have the potential to bring a lot of good to your business, but they may also have some liabilities. And if you're just like good or bad, then you're like, okay, well, partnership, yes, or no, go away, right? And that's not necessarily helpful, right? So as an entrepreneur, you want to learn how to structure a relationship that has an appropriate amount of distance. And again, this is a gradient. This isn't a black and white. This isn't a 0 or 1. What's the appropriate amount of distance that allows you to get opportunity while mitigating risk? You'll have many situations that have both advantages and disadvantages, right? Finding the silver lining in challenges is and capitalizing on it is really important to entrepreneurship. There are a lot of businesses that are built on, what was learned out of something that was not good. That was an unpleasant experience at the time. A big loss with no redeeming value is far worse than a small loss where you can take some benefit out of it. They're not just, oh, well, that's bad, right? You've got to learn to think of it in gradients. When it comes to probabilities, absolute certainty is an illusion that entrepreneurs cannot entertain, right? You've got to learn to deal with probabilities in the course of investment and decision making. And we'll talk more about this when we talk about calculated risk. Another one is that, very often you have to weigh the positives and negatives of something against each other. There's both positives and negatives, and you have to figure it out. A gut feeling of yes or no on what feels good is crude and ineffective. So, and even a pros and cons list is not ideal because that still ultimately comes down to this emotional yes, gut feeling of yes, no. Generally, the best way to handle it is to use numbers and quantitative analysis and calculate the optimal choice. Now, there's some things you can't measure quantitatively, and that is in fact a higher complexity of thinking. And that's more in terms of understanding incentive structures and culture and all of those other things. But that is a supplement to, not a replacement for, real quantitative analysis. Another example, a series of small losses followed by a big gain that makes up for them several times over should be evaluated in terms of total profit, not win-loss record. So scale matters. This is a quote from, I think it was Jeff Bezos. And he said, I will invest all day in something where I have a 10% chance to get 100x return, right? Because, out of 100 bets, out of 10 bets, one of them succeeds. You're minus 10, you're plus 100, you're 90 up. That's a win. Whereas, many people, they don't think that way. They're so afraid of having a loss. They're more focused on having a win. And you see this with newbie financial traders as well. They're so focused on having a win that they ignore scale. And at the end of the day, the profit and loss comes in numbers. It doesn't come in a green check or a red X. That's not how business works. So in all these cases, these are gradients rather than absolutes. These are probabilities rather than certainties. Flawed but potentially valuable people rather than saints and sinners. It's not a 1 and 0. It's not a black and white. And to be successful in entrepreneurship, you've got to be fluent in seeing the world that way. Okay, let's talk about the relationship to money. So one of the big ones here is abandoning wealth resentment. So if you hold beliefs that rich people are evil or that people get wealthy by exploiting society, you are setting yourself up for failure. I know some people politically are, not going to like the fact that I'm saying that. I'm sorry, too bad. That's just the reality of the situation because it leads to self-sabotage. And if you want to go experiment with it and put your own income on the line, trying testing out that, then be my guest. I'm all for experimentation, but I wouldn't recommend it. So there are several ways this leads to self-sabotage. One is that if you think rich people are evil, then your unconscious mind, which doesn't want to be evil, will do its damnedest to stop you from becoming rich or anywhere close to it. Another is that your ability to set prices that provide decent margin and ability to scale will be limited by this fear of making too much profit. And that just guarantees you're never going to be compensated what you're worth. You're never going to grow your business, and you're never actually going to reach more people to help. And then finally, there's this risk of getting caught up in justifications about your price being fair, which is an utterly arbitrary term, and that undermines your confidence in sales conversations. It leads to overcommitments. Like you feel guilty that you're charging what you're charging, and that can lead to just perpetual exhaustion. So anything along those lines, like really give that a really thorough scrutiny. So here are some beliefs that I recommend instead. One is money is the symbol of the debt owed to me by society for the value I've created. Second is every act of voluntary commerce leaves both parties better off than before. And third is that by charging what the market's willing to pay, I give myself the resources to expand my business and help more people. Take those on as beliefs, and that will change your life. Similarly, another perspective shift around money is stop asking yourself about what you deserve. Right? To me, I've been out of this for so long. It's gotten to the point that it's almost curious and strange to me. Because people ask themselves whether they deserve to be happy or deserve to be successful or whether they're worthy. Um, and many people, what they do is they try to like do affirmations and like come up with all these reasons like why they're worthy and why they're such a good person. But that whole exercise just operates on the premise that the question makes some kind of sense to begin with, right? Who or what determines who deserves what, right? It's again, it's entirely arbitrary. The question is entirely meaningless. If I ask you, is a penguin worthy? Is the planet Jupiter worthy? Is a stop sign worthy? Um, it doesn't make any sense. Even if I apply it to another human being, if I'm like, hey, is that guy in Whole Foods worthy of being financially comfortable? But you'd be like, what are you talking about? Right? It's an insane question. But for some reason, when it comes to themselves, then people suddenly somehow believe it makes sense. And it doesn't. It's utterly bizarre. Um, and so anyway, so people play this strange little game where they're justifying to this little like mental bureaucrat in their heads that they're worthy today based on X, Y, and Z. And even if you can convince that little thought pattern that you are worthy, then it will just change the rules in the future. So the goal is not to like submit more affirmations of why you're worthy. It's to just stop playing the game entirely. Like don't even entertain the question. And then the neural circuits will eventually like fade away and die and they'll wither. Because it gets you nowhere. My approach on this is that a plane deserves to fly if it obeys the laws of aerodynamics in such a way that it generates enough lift to overcome gravity. Likewise, you deserve to make whatever the market is willing to pay you for the value that you lawfully create. End of story. Okay, so earlier we were talking about releasing self-judgment. We were talking about making decisions. Now we're going to talk about how that operationalizes actually with money on the line. And that is this idea of calculated risk. So people who have yet to develop an entrepreneurial mindset, they're looking for investments to be sure things, right? We kind of talked about this before when we were talking about binary thinking versus gradients. So this idea of like paying money for something and not getting a return fills them with dread. Let me tell you, I've made a lot of investments as an entrepreneur that haven't panned out. And I've made a lot of investments that have panned out. And overall, my success on, for example, hiring business coaches, um, the ones that have panned out to the tune of, six figures a piece. And the ones that haven't panned out, I've lost, something in the four figures. Like there are things that happen. But if I hadn't made those investments because I've been burned before, because I've been, I was afraid of making a wrong decision, whatever, I wouldn't have a business. So in reality, there's always going to be investments that don't pan out. You're never going to have a 100% success rate. And having expectations of a positive ROI on every decision is a recipe for failure and for analysis paralysis. So you've got to know how to take calculated risks. Now, successful entrepreneurs know how to take calculated risks that tend to be profitable. And there are two principles that are really important. One is to look for asymmetric returns where the benefit of being right multiplied by the probability of being right, which is known as the expected value in gaming or investment, is much higher than the investment. This is the Jeff Bezos thing of I will every investment where I have a 10% chance of making 100x return, I'll do it every day of the week. That's asymmetric returns. The second thing is to avoid risk of ruin whenever possible. So risk of ruin is losses that would bring the business to bankruptcy. So if it's at all possible to avoid that, avoid it. That said, there are some times when there is no option but to take that kind of a risk. And that is always a tough decision for an entrepreneur to make. There are times it's unavoidable, but if you can avoid it, avoid it. Good entrepreneurs minimize being in that position and minimize those decisions to the best of their ability. Okay, here's here's one that many people might find a little bit uncomfortable. Uh, a successful entrepreneur thinks in terms of ROI. They do not think in terms of budget. Most people, in terms of their household or if they're working for a company, they think in terms of budgets. And so they evaluate the spending based on whether they have the money available and they feel they can comfortably spend it according to, whatever the structure of the budget is. Successful entrepreneurs are far more focused on their return on investment than they are on a budget. So if something's going to make a lot more money than the cost, then it's the budget that needs to be adjusted to that reality rather than trying to fit reality into the budget. So for example, let's say you've done all of your budget for investments this month, and then there's something that comes up where, you have a high degree of probability that you can invest and get a 10x return on it. You find the money, right? So an entrepreneur is willing to be financially uncomfortable now if it means higher profits later. And that gets to the next point, which is finding money, right? If you're going to be making positive ROI investments whenever possible, you've got to develop the trait of being resourceful. So good entrepreneurs know how to find money from whatever source possible to make sure their business gets the investments that it needs. So sometimes that means working a job and funneling that money into the company investments. Sometimes it means loans or credit cards. Sometimes it means finding investors, whatever it takes. That's what's necessary very often to make a business work. Obviously, the best option is to increase revenue, right? So when most people are struggling to afford something, their first instinct is to spend less. But I think it was Elon Musk who said something like, if I don't have enough money, my solution is not to spend less, it's to make more. And for a successful entrepreneur, that's their instinct. Oh, well, I'll just go generate more money and I'll find a way to make this work. Especially when that money can be reinvested in something that's got a really good ROI. And so then on that note, that brings us to the last shift related to money, which is creating wealth through win-wins. So we were talking earlier about looking for opportunity. We're talking about opportunity versus necessity. A good business owner is always looking for ways to create wealth. So wealth creation, fundamentally, the way wealth creation works is when someone finds a win-win situation and persuades the other party to participate. So when you're on your own, you're the one in charge of figuring out where you can add value and convincing others to take part. If somebody comes and finds you and lets you know there's a win-win situation, cool. You can't count on that. It's on you to figure that out for yourself with as many people as possible. So a good business owner is always asking, where can my skills and my company's capabilities be useful in a way that everyone benefits? So then that's going to mean stepping outside of your own shoes. That's going to mean seeing the world from other people's perspective, their hopes, their fears, their dreams, their frustrations, their desires, their values, etc. And then understanding how to structure an offer and communication such that they understand it and they're moved by it both logically and emotionally so that they're happy to pay you to solve their problems and improve their lives. And then everybody wins. Okay, so we discussed a lot of evolution of different ways of thinking here, both in terms of quantity and in terms of magnitude. I recognize that some of these shifts may lead you to feel uncomfortable. Maybe not, but there may be some, especially some of the stuff I was talking about with money, as far as ignoring budgets and finding money and taking on debt and those kinds of things, that a lot of people struggle with that. Part of growing into an entrepreneurial mindset is not letting that discomfort control your choices. That said, overcoming fear is far easier said than done. There's a lot of stored negative emotions and limiting beliefs and inner conflicts and, just habitual patterns that exist that keep those things going. As I said, most people have been in this lower complexity way of thinking with fear and guilt and shame and authority and all this stuff for their entire adult lives, right? That's just the reality of the situation. So this evolution is not an easy process. It may be relatively simple and then I can lay it out in this video that's less than an hour long. That does not mean it's easy. Fortunately, I do have a bunch of tools to assist with that reprogramming. So if you want to learn more about that, feel free to get in touch with me. I've got my links here in the document. And with that said, I will see you all on the other side. Wishing you the best.